Um, okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Really glad you're all here. For those who don't know me, my name is Crystal, and I'm a part of the Vermont Peace and Antiwar Coalition. Um, and I think we have a really good evening. I'm not going to take up much time because we have speakers that have a lot to say. But I'm going to give you a little overview of what we're doing. First, I think Duncan's going to speak for about 5 minutes on the weapons industry and manufacturing happening in Vermont and with more coming. Um, and then Will Lambeck from Migrant Justice is going to speak for about 10 minutes about what they're doing, how their community is affected and responding to the times we're living in. Next, Wafik Faour of the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation will take about 10 minutes to update us on their seemingly insurmountable task of liberating Palestine. And last but certainly not least, our main speaker, Todd Miller from Tucson, will speak for about 20 minutes. Then he'll give us a perspective on Elbit and general dynamics and migrant justice from the southwestern angle. After our speakers, we'll have a Q&A. And so, Duncan, you're on.
Hi there. Hi. So my name's Duncan Nichols, and I live in central Vermont, in Thetford, Vermont. And our town, with 5 other towns, passed this resolution, apartheid-free communities, at our town meeting. And I'm also with the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, like Wafik, and so is Henry, and many of us are. But I'm with the host of this webinar, Vermont Peace Anti-War Coalition. And I just want to say a little bit about why we're here and what I think instigated us to have a webinar. And we found Todd Miller, who's an expert on, and well, a writer and researcher on all these issues at the border, and also Elbit Systems, which is the culprit that has a new contract here in Vermont. And I'll just describe that weapons contract. So I'm just going to read because I'm kind of an ADHD person. So there's so much to say about the weapons industry. And shockingly, there is so much going on in terms of weapons manufacturing in Vermont. And we'll only scratch the surface tonight. And bringing attention to the contract for weapons made by General Dynamics in Williston for Elbit Systems and the largest weapons company in Israel, which makes weapons all over the world. It's a lot of various products they turn out, horrible things. And some of it's the surveillance that you may hear about, some surveillance equipment that you will hear about probably from Todd Miller later. Um, so anyway, we want to focus a little bit on the new contract that was announced by the Pentagon in September of 2024 they'll be producing something called the Iron Fist. I can't even say it. The Iron Fist system that is a weapon that's mounted on armored vehicles, all kinds of armored vehicles. And it's being produced by General Dynamics in Williston, Vermont. It's about a $200 million project. And interestingly, another $200 million, this actually the same number, $191 million project was announced for General Dynamics in Maine, at their plant in Maine. So the money's flowing, and so Vermont has this contract that it's due to be finished in July of 2027, in 2 years. Now I'm extemporizing, so you hear me say a lot right now. So as I said, there's a lot of weapons manufacturing that goes on in Vermont, and in fact, someone told me that every congressional district in the United States, I think it's well known now, has some weapon manufacturing happening there. The Pentagon has contracts, and every congressional district in the country, which is extraordinary, really. Um, and so this contract is something we'd like to just expose and to call attention to and probably protest. And I think by the end of this meeting, it would be nice to have some buy-in from people to help us organize that or discuss how to do that. And we assume really, we don't know for sure yet whether General Dynamics is hiring workers for this, but they're going to need a lot of people, and so that'll be happening. So maybe we can have some, intervention with that process. But there's a lot of different ways to look at this and how to expose it or protest against it. So that I'm going to put an article in the chat, which is the Vermont Digger article on the contract itself, which talks about what the product, what the weapon is. And then I'll put some other notes in the chat of other weapons manufacturing in New England. So I made a little survey of New England. And these are all weapons companies that their products will be used in the Middle East and Palestine and Gaza. It's interesting because all of these companies are public. The knowledge is public. If you go to the Pentagon or the government websites, you can read all about these weapons, and there's a lot of information out there. So I'll be asking people, and we'll remind you a little later to, if you're interested in organizing with us about this weapons contract in Vermont, just put your name in the chat or answer the email that I sent out earlier. Any way you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to have you. And I just wanted to mention that General Dynamics, it's one of the top 5 weapons manufacturers in the world. It swallowed up General Electric in 1986, and in 1982 we protested General Electric in Burlington, and General Electric made a Gatling gun, and the Gatling gun was used in Central America, and the Gatling gun fires. It's extraordinarily of what's the word effective weapon that fires 1,000 rounds a minute of very large shells from a machine gun, and it's also mounted on armored vehicles. And just our hope and our work is to liberate Palestine. But we should remember that the military-industrial complex is not going for that. It's not going for any liberation anywhere. In between the years 1981 and 1983, for 2 years, 440 Guatemalan villages were Mayan villages were destroyed. Think of that in that highlands of Guatemala, in the highlands. All those villages were destroyed, and there were 536 massacres. And these are all documented by the military of Guatemala. So that's just a little perspective. And later on, I'll remind people to put your name in the chat if you're interested in helping us. And I'd like to anything, Crystal. You look like you may have something to add there. No? Okay. So I'd like to introduce Will Lambeck of Migrant Justice, and he is one of the lead organizers or coordinators of the Milk with Dignity project or campaign. And I'll let Will speak to anything he wishes to here. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's good to see y'all. Great to see this turnout for really important conversation. My name is Will Lambeck. I'm a part of the staff team at the organization Migrant Justice, which is a Vermont-based organization founded and led by immigrant farm workers organizing for human rights and economic justice. Yeah, really honored to be part of this panel presentation. And the themes are so linked because I think as we all know, U.S. policies of imperialism and militarism fuel forced migration by displacing people from their homes, and then the xenophobic policies of mass deportation and criminalization of immigrants result. And those white supremacist policies within the U.S. also create the ideological grounds for again those white supremacist policies of imperialism to happen elsewhere, including Palestine, in this vicious cycle. So Migrant Justice is led by a community of immigrant farm workers, primarily farm workers in Vermont. I know a lot of you are familiar with the organization and have been following the news. The criminalization, detention, and deportation of immigrants in Vermont is nothing new. This has been happening for decades as the state's renowned dairy industry has come to rely almost entirely on the labor of undocumented workers. Detentions by ICE and Border Patrol happen under Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. This is part of a bipartisan consensus of criminalization and attacks against immigrant communities. And we can also recognize the ways in which those attacks are increasing in their severity and intensity right now. As many of you know, there have been a number of immigration detentions of immigrants in the state over the past month or so. And thousands of people have rallied to support those in detention. And that is now having a positive impact. Two of the detained farm workers have been released. And then tomorrow, there are bond hearings for an additional 3. So anybody in the Burlington area or close enough, we invite you to come to the Migrant Justice office at 10:30 and or at 2:30, where we're going to be collectively watching the virtual immigration court hearings for the detained compañeros in Texas, is where they're being held right now. So this is incredibly, it's devastating and traumatic for the communities that are affected, and in particular the families of those who have been unjustly detained. But we are seeing that through collective action, we're able to liberate the detained comrades, and we hope to see several more home with their families in the next couple of days. And as the community rallies to protect themselves from deportation and defend those who are in detention, folks are also continuing to fight for their rights as workers and protect their rights on the job. So Duncan mentioned the Milk with Dignity campaign. This is a program created by farm workers to ensure protection of their human rights and transform the dairy industry through this incredibly effective and innovative model called worker-driven social responsibility, a model that marginalized workers are using around the world to win real power within corporate supply chains and create systemic and transformational change. Milk with Dignity has been so effective for the hundreds of workers whose rights are protected by the program, but that's still a minority of the dairy workers in the state and in the region. And so workers are campaigning to expand Milk with Dignity to bring more companies in, starting with grocery chain Hannaford Supermarket, which I know many of you are familiar with. It's the largest supermarket chain in northern New England and one of the largest buyers of dairy in the region. There's been a long, hard-fought, ongoing campaign, and we're increasing the pressure in a number of ways on Hannaford, including through organizing consumers to sign a pledge that they will never cross the picket line and to respect a boycott of Hannaford if farm workers call for a general boycott in the future. There have been a number of very successful store pickets, most recently on May Day. From store opening to store closing, workers and allies maintained a 16-hour picket of Hannaford Supermarket, causing hundreds of potential customers to turn away and dropping the store sales by over 25% over the course of the day. So farm workers are showing that they have power, that their demands for freedom and justice are backed by consumers, and that people are willing to hit Hannaford where it hurts in the pocketbook. So I'll share a couple links as I wrap up here. One to a social media post with the information about tomorrow's hearings, and one to the Hannaford Consumer Pledge. And for anybody who hasn't yet, I really encourage all those who can to sign that consumer pledge, showing your solidarity with farm workers. Thanks very much for your time and attention, and looking forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thank you, Will. Thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about, I mean, this whole idea of having a journalist from Tucson speaking, and Crystal knows more about that connection. But the border there and the surveillance by Elbit Systems, which is the company making a weapon here in Vermont, or maybe it won't make it. But it's so interesting to me, these connections. I noticed that Samia Abbas is here. She said she'd be late, but here she is, and she's with the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation. And Wafiq Faour is also here, and both of them will speak for 4 or 5 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever they like about the movement in Vermont. We have a really, I would say, active pro-Palestine movement in Vermont. It's really wonderful. So go ahead, one of you, just jump in.
Go ahead, Ammo.
I was gonna say you go, Ammo. You first.
Alhamdulillah. We were together just a couple of hours ago too. Thank you everybody who invite us to this. This conversation should happen and continue. Thank you, Will, for talking about migrant justice. Us, the Palestinian solidarity and the Palestinian people, we don't separate our struggle from the migrant struggle. And as we talk about it from the arms manufacturer or the wall on southern border that Israeli built it, and no difference than the wall. They are building it on the heart of the Palestinian community inside Palestine. My name is Wafiq, and I am a member of Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation. This coalition started as a reaction for the war and the invasion of the Israeli against the Palestinian on Gaza. And it was a natural, but it was an action coalition that gathered many people who are against the war over there, but at the same time, many people who are connected on our struggle, and we are connected of theirs, because without everybody deserve to be free and liberated. So we talk about it, a collective liberation between us and the migrants, the Black and brown, and the indigenous people, and the LGBTQ movement as well. The survival of this coalition for the last 19 months is because we moved from reaction to anything happens on Palestine. And now this morning, you have to understand, thousands of Palestinian children are facing death because of they are hungry and they are thirsty, and there is no medicine, and all the hospital destruction. Besides that, here we want to center the Palestinian question as a domestic issue here in Vermont, to make it part of our life here in Vermont. Because without the tax money that the American people sending to Israel through arms and other things, the war wouldn't take place or continue thus far. Through that, the coalition adopted the apartheid-free community, which has made us a movement that we went to the streets to collect signatures and to oppose Israeli policy by putting apartheid-free community in voting, where we won in Thetford, where Henry and Duncan live, and they were active over there, plus other 4 municipalities. We're going to continue on apartheid-free community, and I will give my dear niece, Samia, time to speak. Thank you.
Shukran, Ammo. And thank you, everybody. Thanks, Duncan and Henry. Thanks, Will. Excited to hear today's talk from Todd. My name's Samia. I organize with the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, as well as Southern Vermont for Palestine, which is a group that I have been a part of since the beginning of the genocide down here in Southern Vermont, which is where I live. And I think Wafik put it, like, scaffolded and offered the grounding and political grounding for why we're doing the work we do in the coalition. There's been a lot of discussion and talk about, like, what is the next step of apartheid-free work in Vermont. And, you know, probably many on this call are aware of the big win that we had earlier in the year of several towns voting to be apartheid-free communities on town meeting day. And so we're thinking in deep in communication and discussion and strategizing around what is the next phase of that. And I think that this time and this growing authoritarianism and fascism, the tightening of borders, the tightening of surveillance, is setting the ground for what's to come, and why fights like the one we're going to talk about tonight are really important for really making the places where we live, the communities that we seek to protect, apartheid free, and saying that we don't stand for this oppression. What's happening in Palestine, I believe, is at the center of what's happening everywhere, and at the center of liberation struggles. And what we allow to happen there, what we have continued to allow to happen there, is what will be permissible here and everywhere. So I feel that the urgency of those stakes in the game, and also the deepening of communication and tightening of bonds with the comrades here and elsewhere, which I'm really grateful for. And I hope that we can continue to organize around these challenges. Thanks, Duncan, for putting that in the chat.
You're very welcome. And I'll add more to the chat. So reminding people as we go along tonight to write your name in the chat or email us back if you're interested in organizing or knowing more about the weapons contract of the Israeli company in Vermont. And I'll give it over to Crystal now, who is going to take it from here.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, it's really my pleasure to introduce Todd Miller. I lived in Tucson for a while, and we organized a conference there, a conference that lasted 5 days, and it was hugely successful. But the name of the conference was "All the Walls Must Fall," from Palestine to Mexico. And a number of you have talked about the interconnectivity of all of our efforts and how they do blend together. And at this conference, we had Palestinian parents who had lost children to Israel, and we had Mexican parents who had lost children to the Border Patrol, just to give you an example. And we had Mexican dancers who learned Palestinian dance. And, aside from just the regular conference stuff, but Todd was one of our noted speakers, and I'm really glad to have him here. Todd is an investigative journalist who has worked on the southern border, exposing the atrocities and harm done on our southern border with Mexico for more than 15 years. He has direct experience with Elbit, Israel's largest surveillance and weapons systems, and Todd publishes with the Border Chronicle weekly. His books include Build Bridges, Not Walls, A Journey to a World Without Borders, and Empire of Borders, The Expansion of the U.S. Borders Around the World. And Todd, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I turn it over to you.
Right. Can you hear me now? Good. All right. Unmuted. Thank you, Crystal. Appreciate your introduction and appreciate everything. It's nice to be here with you all and to talk about, I mean, what I know about Elbit Systems via my own journalism around this particular company. And so maybe I'll just start. I'd like to situate Elbit in a broader military industrial complex, or a border industrial complex, which is a part of a bigger military industrial complex. And my experience as a journalist covering Elbit Systems, and to get to with some of the bigger issues of what this company does and what it means in the broader perspective, especially around a kind of global stratification that we're seeing. But I first came across, I started covering what I'll call the border industrial complex. As Crystal mentioned, I'm in Tucson, Arizona, about 60 miles from the US-Mexico border. And I've been covering the border for around 2 decades. And I first started covering the border, what I call the border industrial complex, around 2012. And I remember I went to the University of Arizona Tech Park, which is a technology park which hosts a lot of different companies, but they were putting an emphasis on border enforcement. And I went to interview the CEO of the tech park, and he went through the whole spiel about trying to create the biggest cluster of border enforcement companies in the United States. And I said, well, oh, wow, that wouldn't be you're not aiming for the world? And he said, no. I said, well, where is it? And he said, Israel. In fact, Israel is basically the country that we're emulating, right? And so that's when in my own journalism, I started going into that open door of inquiry. And shortly thereafter, I went to a border expo, like a convention. There's many of these border conventions that happen on a yearly basis, and they bring together all kinds of surveillance companies, like all kinds of private industry from all over the world, including Israeli companies, and border guard, border patrol, customs and border protection, immigration and customs enforcement, the whole what we could call the border and immigration enforcement apparatus. And I went to this conference, and first of all, there was a lot of Israeli companies present. And second, there was a brigadier general from the IDF who was present there. And he gave a training, which I managed to sneak into. I don't know how I did that to this day. But he gave a training to Border Patrol, like US Border Patrol. So I sat and watched the Brigadier General from Israel give this 45-minute training with a PowerPoint. But one of the things he said, he started talking about all the different borders that Israel has built, around West Bank, or, on the borders with Egypt, the border with Lebanon, the Golan Heights. And then he started talking about Gaza, and he said, Gaza, I'm actually paraphrasing, but he said Gaza is a great laboratory. So the idea of Gaza being a laboratory, very present. And it's through that framing of Gaza as a laboratory, or the occupied territories in Palestine being a laboratory, or any sort of the border building as a laboratory, is how I view, when I think of Elbit Systems, the company, the largest weapons manufacturer in Israel. That's how I view Elbit Systems, especially how so to back up a little bit, Elbit Systems has as far as the US-Mexico border and its enforcement apparatus, Elbit Systems has played a part in it, had played a part in it up to before 2014. I mentioned 2014 because that's the year that the company got a gigantic contract to build surveillance towers, which are known as integrated fixed towers. But before that, the first drones, surveillance drones that were flown on the US-Mexico border were called Hermes drones, and they were Elbit Systems. So it goes back much further, like a decade before, but 2014, I should say that in 2004 with the drones, Elbit did not get a contract. The contract actually went to General Atomics, which I believe is connected to General Dynamics, just connecting it a little bit to the issue you're looking at in Vermont. So it's connected with General Dynamics, but General Atomics is the company that has supplied drones, the Predator Bees. People probably are familiar with Predator Bees. They did military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then were transferred to the US-Mexico border for surveillance missions, and they still are doing surveillance missions to this day. So, but in 2014, Elbit Systems, there was a request for proposals put out by the US Customs and Border Protection, the parent agency of the Border Patrol, about what are called integrated fixed towers. And this was a surveillance tower system where the towers would form what had been called a virtual wall in the sense like a technological wall, where the towers actually were not separated, they were not isolated, they were actually in active communication with one another, creating a sort of technological force field, so to speak. And you can go back to 2000, actually the request for proposals in 2013. You can go back to 2013 and see a video by Elbit Systems after the request for proposals was made. And the video emphasizes their towers, how they would be the perfect company to construct these towers, and that these towers are so good because they've been tested in Palestine, on the West Bank, particularly in this case. And so they even say in the video, and you can still find this video to this day, they said 10 plus years of securing the world's most dangerous border, and that's in quotes. So that's why the sort of model of testing, like the brigadier general from the IDF said, the Gaza is a laboratory, right? A great quote unquote laboratory. Elbit, like many other Israeli companies, they put the combat proven stamp on the technology, in this case, the technology of surveillance, and say, we are the best at doing this. And so obviously Customs and Border Protection and ultimately the Department of Homeland Security also thought that Elbit Systems would be the best company to build these towers, and hence gave them the contract. And that's so in 2014, Elbit got the contract. It started with $140 million, so kind of near the figure that you're seeing there in the contract in Vermont, I believe, if I remember the figure correctly, to build 50 integrated fixed towers in southern Arizona. And I should say, again, it's part of this virtual wall system. These towers would be equipped with the most sophisticated camera systems, also used in Palestine. Cameras that could see 7.5 miles away, cameras with night vision, thermal energy cameras, ground sweeping radar that has a 13.5 mile circumference that a Border Patrol agent told me was worth 100 agents. It's what the Border Patrol calls a force multiplier, right? And they, again, to mention General Dynamics also has another contract along with Elbit Systems for another type of surveillance tower. They're called remote video surveillance systems, RVSSs. They use acronyms a lot around this part of the world, RVSSs. And they also form a part of what they call the virtual wall. The virtual wall is also a part. It's interesting because you'll hear Democratic in like the Biden administration, when they were in office, they would say, oh, we're not going to build one more foot of wall, but we're going to focus on technology. Well, they're talking about this sort of technology, right? This technology that is put on the border to go hand in hand with the actual physical wall. The actual physical wall on the US-Mexico border is about 700 miles. And the technology is meant to be reinforce the wall. And it's all built upon the strategy, which is known as prevention through deterrence. And the whole idea of prevention through deterrence is to stop people from crossing through traditional crossing places. So they circumvent them, go around into very isolated regions, such as the Arizona desert, where it's difficult to get through and many people die crossing the desert. Up to this point, since the prevention through deterrence strategy has been implemented in the 1990s, there's been at least 10,000 people who have died crossing the US-Mexico border. And most people think that's an undercount, that it's 3 to 10 times more. And that there are many families who are searching for lost loved ones, who many think that died crossing through the desert because it's impossible to carry enough water, enough food, and people die of exposure. I wanted to mention all that to show explicitly that even the surveillance technology that was constructed by Elbit Systems has a very violent effect upon people, and even an effect of, you could say, what some people have called low intensity war. In this, it's not a direct, but it forces people to go through certain places where it is super difficult, if not, as Border Patrol puts it, mortal at times, to pass through these areas. So after Elbit got the contract, I started working on a book called Empire of Borders, which is basically looking at the expansion of the U.S. border around the world. The point of the book was to follow the money from Washington to different border programs in different places around the world. One of the places I went was Israel, Palestine, and particularly to look at the border, this global border industrial complex. And so there's a lot of, I guess, connection with the industry in Israel. But I wanted to point this out because the industry in which Elbit is very much a part, I've seen Elbit speak in a number of different conventions and conferences. I've heard them make claims about their border systems, taking it from a certain large amount of people crossing a border to 0, which is unheard of in border surveillance, but those sorts of claims are made. But Elbit, along with the whole kind of ecosystem of industry that you see in Israel. And one example of it, I went to a drone conference in Tel Aviv, and where they were displaying some of their different technologies. There's a bunch of them I could mention, but as I was standing in this back area where they were showing actually a ground drone that somebody had just put a handgun in, and it was like buzzing around, and they're showing like what they said, a cute little drone could be so deadly. And at the same time, we were watching this ground drone, a UGV, they call them, unmanned ground vehicle, along the ground above us. The guy that was showing us the technology above us, he pointed up and said, there's also a drone flying above us, and it was an orbiter drone. And he said, oh, you can't hear it, right? Usually you can hear the drones, they're very loud. In this case, you can't. It's a silent drone. So they're showing that the Israeli technology is on the cutting edge of this sort of stuff, in this case, drone technology. The announcer said, well, this is doing surveillance. So, and then he concluded by saying it can do surveillance for 2 to 3 hours, and then it can become a missile. So that drone could then find a target and dive bomb that target and become a missile. And I just wanted to point that out just to show, like, when you're looking at the sort of what I would call the industrial complex in Israel, that is by far, of all the different places that I've gone to these conventions, it's by far the most, I don't know the word, it's on the cutting edge. I think that's the incorrect word, but it's the most, they're pushing it to the outer limits, then testing it. And now I'm sure like so much is being tested in Gaza, and then giving that stamp of approval, and then selling it not only to the United States, like the integrated fixed towers that in Arizona, but also around the world. Elbit Systems, I know, has many contracts for their weapons, but also for their surveillance in Europe, I believe in India, in Brazil, just to name a few places. And the last thing I wanted to mention, I'm sure I'm getting close to this, to my 20 minutes, is
You've got plenty of time, Todd.
oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
If you want.
Well, yeah, but I think I'm making my points. But I want to make one more big point. And I want to turn to some of the analysis. I'm sure some people are familiar with Jeff Halper, who's the author. He wrote War Against the People, which is a book around Israeli technology. And actually, I know Anthony Lowenstein as well has a book that I think people probably are already aware of, called the Palestine Laboratory. Both are excellent books. I recently, I think, in the Palestine Laboratory, I interviewed with Anthony. Came to Arizona, and we went out to one of the Elbit towers, and we did a long interview there. So I think there's I haven't seen it yet, but there's one of the I think it's a 7-part series. One of the parts has that in it. But he does both Lowenstein and Halper really do this thorough job of looking at you know, the massive export of weapons and surveillance technology coming from Israel and Elbit Systems, of course. And one of the big points that Halper makes is that they're selling what he calls the global Palestine, right? In the sense that there's the weapons, but the quote unquote answer to what's going on in the world, whether it be massive displacement for many different reasons, war in other places, climate ecological reasons that we're seeing around the world, economic reasons, or that combination of a bunch of things, and the sort of population control and that comes out of Israel is in a way to what I would call, when looking at from a border perspective, the kind of scaffolding of the status quo. Like you go around the world and you want to maintain a sort of business as usual, that business where the contracts can keep flowing, whether they're weapons contracts or any number of other contracts that we're seeing. What it could be, like if you're looking at Latin America and reasons for displacement, like the contracts that hundreds of mining companies are getting, to go and exploit resources all throughout Latin America, and how communities are displaced or their water's poisoned, or the incident after incident that we hear about just by this one industry, right? It keeps, so the sort of scaffolding of the status quo, keeping business as usual, making sure, as Halper put it, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that if the people start to organize from below, well, we have all these ways to stop them, whether it's outright war or with the border stuff. It's the kind of control of populations and making sure that, you know, that people can't come together in such a way. So I wanted to like end my comments on that point, this idea of these border systems. In my book, Empire of Borders, going around the world and just going to all the different places and seeing how much the United States exports its border enforcement to more than 100 countries, and then seeing how much Israeli technology, among other technologies from other countries, but Israeli technologies plays such a prominent part in this, that it's that this kind of massive attempt to control is definitely out there, and which then I guess to end I would like to come back to this meeting and just it's inspiring to hear. It's super inspiring to hear everyone talk before I started talking, and just to hear about the different movements and what's going on from below, right? Because from below, it just seems that there's way more power from below. There's way less people from above and a lot more people from below. And I'm just so honored to be a part of this conversation with you, even from my distant place here in Tucson. So I'll leave it at that.
You're still muted, Crystal. Oh, all right. There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I was trying. Thank you, Todd. That was really a lot of information that I think a lot of us didn't know about. And, you know, our hope is to really encourage people in Vermont to tackle this issue, because it's a big one, and we're a little state, and we can sometimes make a dent easier than other states. Part of that conference I talked about earlier, we took a field trip out to one of the towers in the desert, and we didn't get arrested, but they were watching us. We saw the but we took, it was a great photo op. Anyway, so thank you, and I think we should open it for questions. I'm not sure. I was going to moderate the Q&A, but I think maybe the hosts can see the hand raising easier than I can. Duncan, Henry, is that the case? Hello.
We're making you a co-host, Crystal, so you can see the hands. I guess that's what Henry just said.
Okay.
But we'll let you know. We'll take stack, I guess is the term. So we'll tell you what order people.
Okay.
If you need that.
That would be great. Okay. I see Tim O'Hare and Brian Tokar, 1 and 2. I think you have to unmute them. Can you unmute everybody so that?
There we go. Okay, everybody, turn off your hair dryers and air fryers and radios, and you're all unmuted.
They can mute themselves.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Todd. That was really informative and great. Can everyone hear me? I guess my question, if you have a comment on it, Todd, would be, what do you think the implication of the failure of this vaunted technology on October 7th was for companies like Elbit, where if the Gaza border was the laboratory for the most advanced forms of this technology, we saw it really collapse like a house of cards in one day in the face of some makeshift technology by the militants in Gaza. And I wonder if you have any sense of what what the implications of that were for these companies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Yeah, I'm not sure is in regards to October 7th, but one thing I can comment on is that I've heard companies, and I met with what is it, a startup incubator in Tel Aviv for hundreds and hundreds of these startup companies, and with the CEO, who was very frank in his tellings of what was going on in the situation. And one of the things that he told me was that that companies benefit from a war, right? That when there was a war happening, that there was a benefit because basically because it allowed them to try out their different technologies and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure, as far as, it seems to me that that part of October 7th, I guess, is not necessarily talked about that much, or I don't know. I haven't heard any of the companies make any comments about that. But the idea of having a something or some sort of conflict always happening it seems to be a big part of at least how the industrial complex seems to function, at least there, and probably everywhere. Yeah.
Okay, Brian?
Yes, thanks, Todd, for joining us this evening. I'm curious if you can recommend any sources, either online or elsewhere, that might enable us to get a really comprehensive understanding of weapons contractors here in Vermont, what they're up to, and how they're intersecting with the set of operators that you've been describing.
One place that I immediately think of is there's a website called Investigate, and that's done by the AFSC. And they go in very in depth into all kinds of companies, and in the various facets. So they, from weapons and war, military, to surveillance and border enforcement, they do it all. So when you find out if there's a company, getting a contract in Vermont, you can go to that website and that database and just find all kinds of information about those particular companies. That would be my first recommendation. It's pretty easy. Like, you put in the name of any company, you just put in a Google search with Investigate AFSC, and boom. The odds, they do such a thorough job that the odds are very high that that company is going to show up, and you're going to get all they're very thorough. So you'll get all the different aspects of what that company does. You could go check it out. You could go check out what they say about Elbit Systems, for example, right now, and just see like pages and pages of information.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else? Well, I will ask you, can you tell us, have there been protests in Arizona? Oh, my grandson's calling on the other phone. Around Elbit that you know of, and has there been any success?
You can answer that phone. You can answer your grandson. You can answer your grandson. Yeah, so have there been any protests around Elbit? Surprisingly, not really. And there's been more protests. Raytheon is a huge presence in Tucson. So there's been protests at Raytheon, but Elbit, to my sort of my surprise, because they are so prominent, and you can go out to some of their surveillance towers. You can get to it, a couple of them, very easily, and do a protest. So I've actually talked to some organizers and suggested it, but up to this point, no, I haven't seen any sort of protests to Elbit, at least in the last couple of years. There was one right when the towers were first built around 2015, 2016. Actually, the Arizona Palestine Solidarity Alliance, who you know very well, Crystal, we went I went up with them to one of the towers, and they unfurled their banner, and it caused this ruckus. Like Border Patrol sent up their ATV unit, which they're very loud if you've ever heard them, and they came flying up the hill, like kicking gravel, and came to this like dramatic stop, and really surprised to see all these protesters up there protesting a surveillance tower. And it was a hot moment, but it de-escalated kind of quickly, luckily, I guess. But that was the last. There's been a couple little things, but there haven't been any major protests around Elbit specifically. Maybe that'll change.
Morgan?
I'm wondering if we know if this is the same company that's involved with the surveillance towers that have been built in Vermont. I actually have not seen the surveillance towers that we have between Vermont and Canada, but I thought it was possible. I don't know if anyone on the call has more information about that. I thought Will might have some information, but others might as well. But that seems like a possible target of action.
I think as far as Elbit's concerned, what I know, the integrated fixed towers are in Arizona, and I think they might have built some in Texas as well. As far as I know, along the northern border, they have not, though. I'm curious about General Dynamics with remote video surveillance systems. I know when I did some research on the Detroit River in Michigan and along the Niagara River between New York and Canada, there were what looked like to be those towers, the General Dynamics towers. I'm not sure if there's any in Vermont or not, but I mean, that's what I can recollect. On Albit's, I'm not sure.
Duncan, did you have your hand up earlier?
Oh, just wanted to say that Will posted a link in the chat about the surveillance towers along the Canadian border in Vermont. So thanks for that, Will.
Oh, great. I'll check that out too. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will. Also, someone else in the chat, Will, wanted to know, I can go back and look at it, but it was about, I think it's whether the hearing or something that you mentioned that's happening tomorrow for Migrant Justice, or maybe it's not tomorrow, but it can be viewed online for those who can't get there. Is there a way to video in on that? I don't know if you can hear me, Will.
Yeah, and sorry, my lights failing in the house, so here in the dark. But there is not. Yeah, we're encouraging folks, if they're able to make it, to come to the Migrant Justice office to watch collectively. And if folks aren't able to make it, just keep an eye on our social media for the results.
And the Migrant Justice office is in downtown Burlington, right? Can you say the address?
Sure, yeah. 179 South Winooski Ave in Burlington. And the link that I'd shared above has the details as well.
So thank you. Todd, I read something, I don't remember exactly where, but a couple of days ago, I was looking at some of your work, and you said that you were in Puerto Rico, I think, and you had this revelation about the borders. And I'm wondering if you remember that, what you wrote, and you could describe that a little bit. I thought that was quite interesting. Someone touched on it earlier. It might have been Wafik or Will about borders being everywhere, but
Oh yeah, yeah. So if you go to the west coast of Puerto Rico and just drive down the coastal highway there, you'll see a lot of forest green striped border patrol vehicles, which are super common to see in southern Arizona or along the US-Mexico border. And I was truly amazed at how many of such vehicles I saw. I cruised up and down the island, the west coast of the island, and there's a big border patrol station there. There's huge surveillance towers there. It's kind of set up. It's set up right looking at the Mona Strait, and for the Mona Strait is between the Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Haiti, right? So people are crossing the Mona Strait in boats. And so there's a lot of patrolling going on. And yeah, it's not only creates an impression, it's not even an impression, it's a reality that this idea of borders are everywhere, that the United States calls its border enforcement in the Caribbean the quote unquote third border, meaning that the quote unquote first border is the southwest border, the second border is the Canadian border, and the third border is the Caribbean. And that border, like Coast Guard cutters have gone right up to when the earthquake, people might remember when the big earthquake happened in Haiti in 2010. Like 2 days after that, the 16 Coast Guard cutters went right up to the coast of Haiti. And mind you, I think there was 1 million homes destroyed. Like I think over 200,000 people died in that hurricane. And 5 days after, there was a plane flying over from the United States telling people not to leave, saying, don't leave the island. If you do, we will interdict you. And this was in Creole by the ambassador, it was the Haitian ambassador to the United States, I believe. And the Coast Guard cutter. So the idea of the border being elastic and expansive and can suddenly create itself in a place where it wasn't before is very much a part of what you see in the Caribbean for sure, but more and more around the world. And that's the stuff I was looking at with that book I mentioned before, that the expansion of the US border around the world. And what I did with that book, I literally followed the money. I looked at different programs that Washington had with different countries. I could have went to 100 different countries. Of course, I had to limit myself, and I went to like 6 places. But I was at the Jordan-Syrian border, for example, and looking at a $300 million border surveillance system that the United States paid for Jordan, that was being constructed by the Raytheon Corporation, again with ties with Israel. I went to the Philippines, where they talk about the maritime border system, another big thing that was built by Raytheon and with US funding. I went to the Guatemalan Honduran border, and went to like a new border patrol that they had there that was just trained by the US Embassy. I mean, those are just some examples. I could just keep going and naming different places of this, how the border, what I call the expansion of the US border, and again, I think it plays into this kind of scaffolding of borders you see around the world. And then you go back into the industrial complex and how much Israel plays a part in it.
Okay. Wafik?
Yes, thank you. I just remembered, thank you, Todd, for the presentation. We met in Montpelier 6 years ago, maybe.
Oh,
Climate
yeah.
change and borders. Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you again.
I
Good to see you
remember.
again.
Yeah, that's great to see you again too.
Yeah, good to see you again. If you said if a movement from down up, the people movement against Elbit, Elbit is not one product that you can boycott it. It's not people can use what they are producing. How do you imagine the people to organize to stop Elbit through boycott or through some kind of a movement? How do you imagine it?
Yeah, I don't know. So as a thanks. I think that's the question is such a good one. But like as a journalist, I'm there like looking at what they're doing, like what Elbit's doing and how it plays a part in this whole other huge ecosystem and how like it's almost as one scholar, a movement from above, right? The movement from above, like a sort of elite, and how to organize against it is, I think, if you were to ask me, and I'm a journalist, so I hope to do is present things that where organizers take the baton and do that sort of organizing, of course. But I think, yeah, like what you say, I mean, boycott is one way to do it. Like I think there's probably tons of things. Like one of the things around here, and I said that earlier to Crystal's question, was it's amazing to me that Elbit hasn't been protested here in Arizona with all these towers. Like why haven't there been any sort of, there hasn't been a movement around Elbit at all. And it's sort of an easy target. Like people could go out to one of these towers and make a big stink about it. And I know that oftentimes companies don't like to have that sort of spotlight put upon them. So I imagine a lot of little things, but I just hope, that like those sorts of ideas, I don't like, I think probably many things, the organization, but I just hope like organizers, like I trust the organizers, but how, I don't know. It's such, I know you go back to this idea of like this huge powerful monolith, and it's not just Elbit's part of this bigger thing, and you're in this this gigantic entrenched thing. I bet other people have all kinds of ideas here, like what you might be about to do here in Vermont or there in Vermont might be a good example.
Okay, Nancy?
I think you're muted.
Nancy, you're muted.
How's that?
There you go.
Well, you mentioned population control. Can you say a little more about that, what you mean?
Yeah, population control. That's how I heard the term used in the sort of Israel, like in Tel Aviv. Border control is another way to put it. This whole system of border infrastructure, I would call it, including checkpoints, the Kailandia, for example, or the multiple different checkpoints or all the kinds of checkpoints that you see where people are constantly have to stop and talk to authorities, and authorities question them, combined with different places where you can't cross unless you have certain papers. And then if you have the certain papers, you can cross. You're verging on, or you are in apartheid, and this sort of idea of like who can go where, who can't go where, who's allowed to go because of having certain papers, who cannot go, right? And so that's what I mean. And the point I was making at the time was that the Israeli technology and strategy around border control is now known as the most, I guess, among like people, they do trainings around the world about how they do that. So it's kind of the exportation of that sort of population control is now, you can see it in different places around the world. I hope that helped.
Thank you.
Okay, Duncan, your hand is raised, and maybe this will be our last one, which will.
Sure. Yeah, so Wafik's question about, I guess it's really about the weapons manufacturers. They're vast and they're everywhere. But we do have this contract in Vermont. They will be hiring workers. So there's a bunch of places we can insert ourselves and protest. You know, we can write letters to the editor, but also we have this thing we did last town meeting, which was to get our towns to sign the pledge to withdraw all support from the apartheid regime in Israel. So, you know, people could go to a town meeting, people can go to their select board, they can have a and say something like, well, you know, both our senators in Vermont uh, have introduced legislation to stop arming Israel during the genocide. And so why can't our senators, you know, publicly come out against that weapons contract? There are a lot of ideas, as you said, multiple ideas. Morgan, I think, had a very interesting idea that she just explained was suggested, which was on the northern border. I think, Morgan, you said something about if there's surveillance up there. You know, there's lots of ways, you know. So I just think we need some creative ideas. And I guess that's organizers, but it's more like a vision of how to educate Vermonters, you know, how to make a little splash so people can learn about this, because Vermont is full of weapons manufacturing. In fact, a big company, what's it called, Global Foundries, they make secure chips. And both of our senators have funneled the money to Global Foundries because they want Vermont to be the leader. I think it was Senator Welch said we want the Vermont to be the leader in this kind of chip. It's gallium oxide. It's very high-tech, secure chip for weapons and other applications. So there's just a lot of ways that we can educate and a lot of places to do that. So I'd be happy. I think a few people in the chat have already responded and said they'd like to do something. So we'll get in touch with you and we'll start to come up with ideas. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. And thanks, Todd. It's vast, really. It's vast, but the oceans are vast and the stars are vast and our hearts are vast. So we just won't be too overwhelmed because we're already vast. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Thanks,
thank you
everyone.
everyone for coming. And I hope you learned something. I know I did. And Todd, really good to see you. I miss Tucson a lot. Maybe Felice and Jack need a new project. Elbit.
Next time you're here, let's grab a coffee.
Definitely. Okay. Thanks. And with that, I'll say good night.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care now.
Good night, everyone.